Okay, great. So we'll just leave it like this. So my name is Bridgit O'Shea. The first thing to say is that I work for a German film festival called Doc Leipzig, which is the oldest festival for animation and documentary films in the world. But you might notice from my accent that I'm actually not German at all, I'm Australian. But I've been working for the film festival for 10 years. And I don't program the cinema. I'm responsible for the doc industry program, which is one of Europe's largest markets for documentary films. We specialize in creative documentaries, so the kind of films that you might have seen at Watch Docs, rather than formatted television. What we're going to talk about is making your first steps into the international marketplace, how you can make your application stand out from the rest because it's highly competitive. Actually, this is more of a presentation setup because you don't have a panel of people who will give you money necessarily. They're all hidden in this audience, which is one of the offers that we have at Doc Leipzig. But also more what I'm going to talk about today is probably individual meeting formats, one-on-one, how to discuss your project with international partners, particularly if they're not familiar with Belarus or even necessarily the post-Soviet context. So the origins of industry activities or marketplaces that run parallel to film festivals mostly comes from, in Europe, let's say, on a European level, comes from the European Union's cultural initiatives that are funded through the media program. Doc Leipzig, in my case, our market was founded 15 years ago, but basically in a European context, they all kind of stem out of the last 20 years. And the reason why these marketplaces exist is to give you access to decision makers. Decision makers are funders or broadcasters or other partners who can help you either finance or distribute your film. They're designed to give you access to the money, but they're not designed to give you the training in order to participate in the model. There are other workshops and programs that offer specific training that can help you, let's say, make the step into the markets, but I would say that it's more important, first of all, to go and do your training. The Creative Europe program also offers training, but there are lots of other partners who will also help you develop a language to communicate with market players. And really, my step that I'm going to be talking about today is step B, but you also really want to participate in step A. And I can give you more information and help about how to access that step A in the first place. But really the difference between like a training initiative, which might be something like the X-oriented program out of Prague, which for example filmmakers from Belarus are eligible to participate in, or somebody else who shall remain anonymous in this audience who also offers this kind of training. It's really important that if you decide that you have a project that you think needs the intervention of the international market, needs international funding in order for it to reach its potential or in order for it to reach the right audiences, that before you even consider coming to the marketplace, you meet people who will help train you for the marketplace. But as I said, today we're going to focus really more on markets, but it's really, I cannot highlight this step first highly enough. This training initiatives part, the best place to start is actually with the training in order to develop a language which will then allow you to access the market. So once you have developed your language to discuss your project with the international market, then you have to work out which market is right for you and your project. So the first step to do is to do your research. So how do you work out where to find these markets? The best place to look is actually on either the Creative Europe website, which lists the programs that it funds. Markets, unlike training, don't usually have geographic restrictions. So even if you come from a place that isn't part of the European Union, you are still eligible to participate. Society has great resources also, and so does the POV PBS website, which is an American resource, but also useful. And so you can click through all of these different websites, read the submission guidelines, and think about what might be useful for you. But even more importantly, you can start by using anecdotal evidence. So that means asking friends or colleagues who maybe have already participated in these kinds of workshops or markets about what they think worked for them. Understand that markets select different kinds of projects in different kinds of stages. Of course, exceptions make the rules. This means that not all of these marketplaces pitching forums, co-production markets are looking for the same thing. Actually, usually we're looking for slightly different things. And so it's good if you can kind of map out for yourself, or get your producer to map out who is kind of looking for what and when. And so the criteria are things like the production stage. So some markets are really looking for films that are in a very early stage where your ideas are very fresh and very raw, while others are looking for things that are maybe much closer to being completed, where maybe you've already shot all of your footage and you're just looking for distribution partners. Some markets look for films that are more likely to be in television and will match you with television partners. Others are really more focused on theatrical films and creative documentaries. All of this information is usually on their websites, but if you feel like you can't interpret it, then you can also call us. Nothing makes me happier than when a filmmaker will call me on the telephone just after we have opened our period of like looking for projects. Nothing makes me more mad than when a filmmaker calls me on the deadline. But it's really great if you can also tell us about who you are in order for us to tell you if we think it's worthwhile to fill in the application form and possibly pay a fee, or we can give you then a waiver so you don't have to pay the fee. But if we don't know who you are, then that also makes it difficult for us just to judge your application on paper. So one of the first things you can do to make your application immediately stronger is make contact with us. I wanted to show you this picture because sometimes people have, or film markets have the reputation of being horrible places that are traumatizing for filmmakers, and that it's just like the worst part of the job. But I just look at these people having like such a nice time and smiling and happy. So you can also have like a happy time in a market if you do your research and prepare. So at Doc Leipzig, we get about 350 submissions, of which we can only select 30 projects. And sometimes I think like filmmakers think or have the impression that we have these selection criteria in order to like keep them out of the market, but actually what we're trying to do, or in my case, I also use the selection criteria to bring the right people in. So sometimes you will get rejected from a market or from a film festival with a film that is so beautiful and a project that is so excellent, and yet it still isn't enough to cross the threshold to be selected. So we have selection criteria also for really pragmatic reasons. We have a selection criteria in order to limit the number of project submissions and set an even playing field for selection. We also try and do is set a selection criteria that evens the playing field rather than perpetuating the gaps in fairness, let's say. But we really need you because you only have good decision makers if you have good projects, and you only have good projects if they're good decision makers. So that means it's really in our interest to set a criteria that gives us the kind of projects that the decision makers who come to our market can finance, so that they keep coming back and say, oh, what wonderful projects you have, so that they also are meeting with projects that they can support with the resources that they have. So that's why we have to go all over the world looking for the best projects in order to make our decision makers happy. So particularly if you're coming from a smaller region that we are not so familiar with, make yourself known, because it is really what we're looking for. We're looking for unusual, unique things that we can offer that nobody else can. We're going to talk now about this concept called FOMO, which is something that young people use. It's an acronym for the fear of missing out. And what you really want to do is spend your time giving people who organize film markets or training initiatives the idea that if we don't select you and your project, and if we don't work with you, then we are going to miss out on something really special. Because we love to be people who open doors and opportunities for people who don't necessarily have them as easily as other people. So this concept of this world premiere, national premiere, international premiere, first is becoming more and more predominant, I suppose, in this world of festivals and markets. Personally, I think it's silly. I think that there is a dramaturgy to how you present your projects in the international market, and it doesn't really matter where it starts so long as it's at a market that is designed for projects that are in development. Yeah. Really, you should start building this before you complete an application. So once you've targeted where you want to go, which market you want to access, or which training initiative you want to apply for, if you've never participated before, it's a really good idea to open up with a phone call or an email to one of the organizers. And it's really good if you can stress these points to us so that we understand why we have to take your project. And for me, the first one is to start with uniqueness. So what makes this project unique? Why have I not seen it before? Even if it is something that is universal and we have heard before, what makes it unique is your point of view. What makes it unique is that you are the right person to make this film. What makes it unique is that you are an extremely creative person. So always come back to this, what is this thing that makes this the first time that this is happening, even if we've seen the film before? Access means that you have access to something that we don't. So that might also be, I don't know, I can't think of any good example, it's bad. It might be that you have access to a government office that only you have access to because your father worked there, or your grandmother, or your aunt, or your cousin, or your neighbor. You have access to a closed world or to a closed system that the general public has never seen before, or your grandmother will tell you all her secrets about her love affair in the 1960s that might have changed world politics, or you will spend 1 year following an artist while she shows her first solo show at the MoMA in New York or something, so that you can demonstrate that you can embed yourself in a world that not anyone can go into. Is usually a good one. Explain what will be my loss if I don't invite you, because I like to win. I like to be a winner. I like to have like the most beautiful things, and I like people to leave my festival feeling really happy and satisfied. So if I don't invite you, what will my festival lose? What will another festival gain if they invite you and I made the mistake of missing out? And it could be all kinds of things. It's not just about, it can be about opening doors for other people. It might be that I had never had a Belarusian project in the market before, you know? So explain to me what I will lose if I don't invite you to come to Leipzig. So what will you lose if you don't participate? Because what we're talking about here is not local money, we're talking about international money. And so I need to understand also how an international partner can be involved in your project. And small local stories can still function very well in the international market, but as I am only one simple lady from Australia, I don't understand every part of the world. I certainly don't understand smaller parts of the world so well, and so you should always just assume that whoever you're talking to doesn't understand these stakes that we don't understand, and really explain them to us so that it is very clear. And once I understand the stakes, usually that makes me feel very passionate about your project, and then I want to include it and make the exception to break the rules, let's say. So after you've made that initial contact with us and it comes time for you to complete your application form, the best thing you can do is send us exactly what we ask for, rather than sending extra materials or like anything longer than 1 page, any material, visual material longer than 3 minutes. I do not have time to look at it, and I will not look at it. So just don't assume that I will be woken up after a nice conversation on the telephone or via email. I am very busy, unfortunately. So that's why I really prefer it if you send me what I ask for, and that is by reading the submission guidelines again and completing the application, and in the best case, maybe 1 week before the deadline so I can take a look at it. Because most markets receive 95% of their applications on the deadline or afterwards. Usually by the deadline, out of those 300 projects, I probably have 25 completed applications on the week before the deadline. So that means if you complete an application the week before, I'll have time to like look through it, maybe once, maybe watch your trailer, give you some feedback, and then you would still have time to make changes if I say, I read your application, but I don't see the stakes, for example. For markets, you can always request an extension. It's never a problem because we always get all of the submissions at the end. And so for us to have some coming in like 1 week later is really not the end of the world. Sometimes you can negotiate that you send the visual materials later so you have more time for shooting, or you can send the written materials later so you have more time for translations. But if you ask on the deadline, we'll say no. But if you ask 1 week, 2 weeks before, then we'll always say yes, always. Now that you've understood what we're looking for, don't overlook the financing plan, because you can have like the most beautiful visual material, you can have the most wonderful synopsis, but if you send us a financing plan and it only has national financing sources, or financing sources that we don't offer because every market is idiosyncratic, then you will really reduce your chances of being selected. You know, you really, in that first round, especially if you're coming from somewhere that we are unfamiliar with, and if we don't know you so well, take the time to make your application strong. All of the resources that you need to do that are in those submission guidelines, or through a phone call, or through sending us materials in advance that we can have a look at. But the financing plan is just as important as your visual material and your written materials. Trailers, teasers, pilots, mood pieces, sizzle reels. Why so many words for visual materials? Why can't markets all just settle on one term in one form? Minutes. In the case of Doc Leipzig, because our market is specifically focused on helping you in the development phase find co-production partners, what we're looking for is more trailers and teasers. And trailers and teasers are more made up of research materials. So that means that it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you've shot specifically for this film. It could be materials that you find on the internet, found footage, archive material. But what it should give us is the view that the materials that you have sent us have a beginning and a middle and an end, so that you have a clear concept of what the film is. We don't expect you to know the outcome. We understand that it's documentary filmmaking and that it's not scripted. But within that trailer, we like to see a clear beginning, middle, and end. And we like to get a feel for the director's point of view. So that should be coming through even if it's not your own footage. And it should be about 3 minutes, no longer. There are also great workshops you can take that will help you develop your trailers. I just can't stress enough that to be competitive in the international marketplace, you have to have these visual materials. It is an absolutely inherently important criteria that becomes more and more important as time goes on. And if you don't have visual materials to show people from outside your community, then you're really not ready. That means that like you should really wait. There's nothing wrong with waiting another year rather than jumping the gun until you have these materials on a level that will bring you into the playing field, onto the playing field. Even if you're a director, understand what the financing plan looks like, and understand what your producer is asking for, and ask questions about it, because financing plans come with deliverables. So that means if somebody gives you money to make the film, then they have expectations about what that film will be when it comes back to them. And there could be, some are more free and more flexible when we're talking about film funds. But if you're working with public broadcasters from other countries, they really have an expectation about what that film will be. And you need to understand also for yourself if you can fulfill that expectation or not. And if you can't, there's nothing wrong with saying we cannot work with that partner. Just really remember all the time that finances come with strings. You get to putting this financing plan together. This will also make it clear for yourself if you need to participate in the international market. Because I would say also that a realistic budget in the ballpark of a good selection criteria, because international co-financing makes your budget enormously bigger than if you were making a film just with Belarusian resources, right? So when I look at an application, which we'll also come to later, when I'm doing project selection for something, I will look at the budget and decide if that is a realistic budget for international co-production, and that means that the budget is somewhere between 250 and €1,000,000, 250,000 and €1,000,000. Because I also know that you can make amazing films for €10,000. This is perfectly clear to me. So markets know usually the realistic world of what's going on the ground in your marketplaces. We know how you work because you've told me on the telephone. That also usually helps if I don't know in the months before. And then, but what we're doing is showing financiers that you're on the same playing field and you're playing the same game as a German or a French producer, because we really want you to be on the same playing field. And that means that if you can raise that budget, everybody gets paid, and that's also good. You should also think of the market as being your ambassador. So we are also here to convince the German public broadcaster to give you the money to make your film. And we are here to help you also get familiar with the rules of the game. But it has a really different set of rules than it does when you're working with national financing sources. This, I think, is like the fun part. So being local, but looking like you're global, even though I know you are global. So this point is so important. Provide us with context, background information, additional information for people who are not familiar with your story in order to create holds and anchors. I cannot stress enough that nobody knows everything about the world, and particularly if you're coming from places that we don't know about, that are more closed, that are more geographically remote, speak languages that are not French, German, or English or Spanish. It's really, really hard for us in the Western world to understand your world because we don't have access to you. But really just assume that we don't know anything about it, and the more you can inform us, the more likely it is that we can take you into our world to share our resources with you. I actually think we should talk about this point first, which is understand basically every film has already been made on every subject. We have 150 years of film history. There are a lot of films already, and we live in a time when the market is absolutely saturated. There are more films being made than ever before, some of them good, some of them bad, and everything in between. And so when you are meeting a financier, or when you are having that initial conversation with somebody from the international market, it is extremely likely that we've already seen a film on this subject, and it's extremely likely that it's been made from a northern Eurocentric point of view. So it's extremely likely also that the point has been missed. So you really need to find an answer to, I already saw a film on this subject, what are you going to bring me that is new? And to be extremely, extremely concrete about it, and to really share with us what makes you special and unique. And that means that when somebody asks this question, you cannot be defensive and you cannot be personally offended by it, because it challenges your authority on the subject. So you really need to find and develop mechanisms for yourself, especially if you're making a film about a subject that is grossly misunderstood, that will show that you are ready to tell the story in a new way that will change discourse, let's say. Yeah. Using this context, background, and additional information to do things like challenge stereotypes, break stereotypes, show us new perspectives on things that we think we don't understand. I think it's really important. So, context and background information isn't confirming necessarily a decision maker's thoughts on what Belarusian stories are. You can be adding to what they think they are. I think that's really important, because we are coming into a time now where people are more media savvy, so just using cliches isn't good enough. I think we have a responsibility to also be challenging people's points of view on this. I already saw a film on the subject, what makes it different, this one different. And finally, of course, global subjects, things that we have all in common, are not necessarily only issues. So global stories are not all issue-driven documentaries that want to change the world. You can also use your art. Your point of view as a director can also be something that is a global story. Your understanding of a world, even if it is very, very small, sometimes can be like some of the most enlightening and globally relevant films of our time. So really don't think just about things like injustice or violence or love. You know, really think about what you bring as an artist. What are your contributions to the creative documentary genre that also are globally relevant. So when I'm selecting projects, and this is just mine, everybody kind of probably does it a little differently, but this is how I read an application when I'm doing a project selection for a market. And I think this is really important. So in our case in Leipzig, we get this 350 submissions, and then we reduce those submissions to 80. And then a selection committee will read those 80 projects and decide on the 30 that we select from this open call. We also, other places do it differently. Some places have just like a random selection of projects that they get from a total selection of projects. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know, if you have 1,000 projects, then 5 people will be engaged to read them. We do an internal read, reduce to 80, and then give those 80 to a selection committee who then select the 30. Where are they from? Do I not know them? If I don't know them, how do I not know them? Because I feel like I should know everybody. But of course, like, you can't know everybody, so it's always interesting if somebody also appears out of nowhere, you know, or out of nowhere into my world. And am I familiar with the story? So is it about like an animal shelter in Kiev? And have I seen a film already about an animal shelter in Kiev? You know? Or is it about someone's grandma who was a famous artist? Or, I don't know. Am I familiar with the story? Have I heard about it before? And if I haven't heard about it before, usually I'll also Google it to see like what the internet says about the story. Good idea about where you should also be prioritizing your time when you're completing applications, because sometimes people send like really terrible, unclear filmographies or biographies that don't give us any insight into who you are. And in the case of my market, what I'm primarily interested in is like taking care of people, and the films are secondary. So what I'm also always looking for is really interesting people who are either making their first steps, have already made amazing films that I might have seen at film festivals, or shorts that have been awarded at like Berlinale or somewhere fancy, or might teach at a film school or something like this. All of this information is extremely relevant and often overlooked. So really also make sure that you spend 10 minutes updating your CV and biography and making it understandable to people from outside of your home context. Because, for example, sometimes I'm not familiar with every film festival in the world, and so if you've won a prize at a festival for a short film that's like your national Oscar or something, say equivalent of Academy Award in Belarus or something, it's always like, make sure that you're pushing your assets forward always. Don't be humble. Then next I watch the trailer. How much I like the trailer dictates how much time and attention I pay to the synopsis and director's note. It's not because I'm lazy, maybe it is sometimes, but mostly because I'm only human, and don't forget, we are also just humans. But it's also because I like to be time efficient, and I don't like to waste time on things that I don't think are relevant unless you have convinced me otherwise. So how much I like the trailer defines how closely I read the synopsis and the director's note, which is why it's a good idea to really pay attention to the trailer and to this first part of your application. And the reason why I say the answer is more often no than yes, that a financing plan is prepared for a co-production. The reason why I say, like, take your time, check those numbers, make that financing plan relevant for the market, and there's a template for it in the submission guidelines. In every market, every application you'll do, there'll always be a template. Fill it out, just send us that, is because we do this initial sweep. So if you want to make it to the 80 and you have a convincing trailer and a convincing financing plan, you're probably done 75% of the work, I would say. How to make the market organizers fall in love with you and your project, because often also we make the final decisions. So our international selection committee or our selection committees will give us advice, but usually it falls on us to make the final decisions. And I would say in the case of Doc Leipzig, those top 80 projects all are worthy of being selected. We could really program something out of, a random selection of 30 of those 80 projects. So if you want to push yourself up into the 30, do things that make us like you, because this concept of nepotism, of helping your friends, I think is really real in our industry. And it's not necessarily a bad thing even, because we really do want to help ambitious people who on paper might not look as strong as somebody who's been to a German film school, has a German producer, has 30,000 euros in development money, who's traveling to a film festival once a month. On paper, they're probably going to have a stronger application, but we love to bring new people in. Yeah. The first one is respect deadlines, respect deadlines, respect deadlines. The easiest way.
Всегда укладывайтесь в срок.
Share updates and information regularly, including new sources of financing, or if you've been selected for other events, don't hide it, we will find out. I talk to everybody. I am the keeper of international gossip. I know everything about you if you're selected for my market. I know everything. So it's better if you're the first person to tell me rather than to hear it from somebody else. And usually it's never a problem, and usually I'm super happy for you. This also includes if something changes. So if your protagonist is suddenly incarcerated, or if you have to cancel your participation for some reason, it's never a problem, but the best thing to do is just to tell us as soon as you know. Even if it's, I think I might have to cancel, or this subject is too sensitive for the catalog, is there another way that we can describe it, or we cannot send this trailer to everyone, that we have a lot of flexibility, and we're also used to working with projects that are fragile and politically sensitive, but just tell us in the most explicit terms that you can. And just the others I think are clear, but be as generous as you are willing to take. We're all in it together. Never forget that your projects are the most important part of this. And never forget that market organizers are not people who are trying to keep decision makers away from you. In fact, we are your ambassadors. And so if you are generous with us, telling your stories, sharing information, explaining the context of what we're seeing to us, then it also makes us more generous on your behalf. So if we all come to these events with the spirit of generosity rather than defensiveness or fear, then actually it's more successful for everybody. Look at all these happy people having such a good time at Doc Leipzig.
Они все участники Лейпцигского фестиваля. Посмотрите, насколько они счастливы, радостны.
And this makes me very happy, because I really, the way you know that you're doing your work well is when people who are going through this extremely tough circumstances, they have 40 meetings over 2 days, are constantly having to justify and explain themselves to Western decision makers who don't understand anything, and yet we can still have a nice time.
Вы знаете, как понять, что ты все делаешь хорошо?
And then this one I will just leave up. Share information with each other. Share everything you know about anything. Tell everybody in your community, because the more you can help each other, the easier your lives will be later on. If something is a waste of time or money, analyze why. If it was because you weren't prepared enough, then remember that you'll be able to do it again in 1 year, and so the earth will not cease to exist. The sun will still rise tomorrow if you have a bad pitch or a bad event. But really think about if you need to prepare yourself better for next time and how you can do that. But if that's not the case and you think it's the event itself, you should tell the market organizer, because actually we are very open, because we don't want to repeat the same mistakes and we do want to be better. Do not do it during the event. while the event is going on, because then there's nothing we can do, and also that will just make us sad, and sadness does not lead to productivity. But tell us maybe 1 week later, be honest in your evaluation. Say if you think that like sensitive information has been leaked, or say if you feel like you were misunderstood. Let us know so that we can be better, and really think about like if something was a waste of your time or money, if it was down to you or if it was down to the event itself. And then also tell other people in your network, I made this mistake because I didn't go with this resource, or don't go there, they won't understand you. Both can be the case. And I have one last thing. Coffee breaks, dinners, cocktails are as important as your individual meetings or your public pitch. You really need to use your time to be present, to be talking, meeting people, not trying to hunt like game the head of Arte or the fanciest German commissioner. Producers, other partners can be like your strongest allies and unlock resources that you never even dreamed were possible. So really use your time at markets to be as present and in the moment as you can, and try to suck as much out of it as you possibly can. And that's it. I'm finished. But you can ask me any questions you like at any time. I'm a very busy person because I do try and read everything. Try and just keep it as brief as you can. Don't send me like a 10-page letter because I will never read that. But like 5-6 lines I will always read, and 3 minutes of trailer I will always watch. And like if you send me an email in February, that's a really good time. That's when I'm starting to really look for new projects for this year. And it's a good time because you can access a lot of different events that are starting in the summertime.
Теперь отправимся и выпьем чашечку кофе.
Good. Sorry.